The Florida Supreme Court is allowing a vote on a constitutional amendment on abortion this November. It will need 60% of the vote to pass. The proposed amendment says laws can't, quote, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health. To get to understand all of this, as we love to do, bring in our CBS News legal contributor and expert on so many of these constitutional matters and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Jessica, I'm so glad to have you. I understand that Florida had a 15-week abortion ban that had been debated for a while. I understand that the governor had also signed into law, but it was being challenged in the courts, a 6-week abortion ban. So what does this mean today? What will happen and what goes to the voters?
Great question. So there were two different decisions from the Florida Supreme Court just moments ago, and it looked like the decisions basically go as follows: that the Florida Supreme Court upheld the 15-week ban, which actually has the effect of allowing the 6-week ban to go into effect. I believe that starts in 30 days. Wow. So shortly, at the end of April, the 6-week ban will be in effect in Florida. Now let's go to that second ruling, the second Florida Supreme Court ruling. What they said is that a ballot measure that has been circulating that would amend the Constitution, that can be on the ballot in November. And so people in Florida can vote on whether or not in the Florida Constitution, they will protect the right to obtain an abortion, and it will be protected up to the line of viability, which is, of course, later than 6 weeks and later than 15 weeks. What that means is, while we are waiting for that vote in November, it looks like the 6-week ban, as we said, will shortly go into effect. Then, depending on what happens in November, either that ban will continue, that's a state law that the governor did sign into law, or that state law would be trumped by the constitutional issue that the voters will weigh in on, at which point then the law would change, and the law would be that abortions are allowed up to viability and or to protect the life of the mother.
Let me ask you, Jessica, this is a bit of a political question here, thinking about the election, because abortion rights and protecting abortion rights has been such a galvanizing issue, especially for Democrats. So basically what this does is, between now and the election, Floridians, there's going to be a 6-week ban, and that, what you're saying, is effective at the end of this month, so within 30 days. And I can imagine that then there's going to be all of this pressure to campaign on the issue between now and November. Do I have that timeline correct first?
I think that's exactly right. We need to look at the ruling a bit more carefully to make sure that that 30 days does in fact exist. But it looks like, at least from about now until November, Floridians will be living with a very restrictive ban on, or limitation on, abortion.
Abortion is truly, I mean, something that arises passions on both sides. And that's why I was saying I can imagine that there's going to be so much campaigning between now and then. And I've seen that there are groups that are very much anti-abortion rights and groups that are very much pro-abortion rights, all having to do with this case. How did this get to the Florida Supreme Court, this decision?
So a couple of things I'll say to answer the political issue first. I think it's fair to say that Democrats are pretty excited about this being on the ballot. And what they believe is that this could energize not just Democrats, but that this could energize independents, no party preference voters, those swing voters. And I think there are Democratic candidates. Obviously, we're not just voting on the president, but down the ballot who will want to make sure that people show up. And once you're there to vote on abortion rights, then chances are that you will continue to fill in your ballot. And there's a discussion about the Senate race in Florida, and then already all the way down, to the state legislative races. Now, in terms of how this got on the ballot, we're talking about two different decisions here, but let's take the decision that allows the voters of Florida to weigh in on this question about whether or not they will amend their constitution. This arrived in the state Supreme Court because, interestingly, the state Supreme Court has kind of a gatekeeping role to play when it comes to constitutional ballot measures. And what they do is they check for a couple of things. They make sure that the text of the ballot measure is not misleading, that when you look at the title and summary, that voters essentially understand what they're voting on. And that's what the majority of the Florida Supreme Court's ruling really focuses on: the ballot title and summary. Is it clear to the voters what they'll be weighing in on? And then the other thing that the Supreme Court checks is whether or not there is a single subject. So, for instance, you can't ask people to vote on abortion and marijuana in one measure. I think it's important to focus on the fact that the Florida Supreme Court's role is actually quite narrow. They're checking for ballot title and summary. They're checking for voter confusion. They're checking for the single subject rule. This is not the Florida Supreme Court saying we think it's a good idea to put this on the ballot. And there's a small check to ensure that the proposal isn't facially unconstitutional. But this is not a searching review by the very conservative Florida Supreme Court.
I can imagine that. So I can imagine that, thinking of that, then this might not be as surprising, seeing as it's more like a technical question. I must say, because you mentioned that, that also the other decision that came down had to do with marijuana and that going to voters as well. But I kind of want to stay with abortion rights here, because I wonder how this decision might impact other states, because there are other states that are trying to protect abortion rights on their ballot.
That's a great question. And I think it really points us to the following answer, which is that abortion is largely a state issue right now. That's everything that happened after the decision in Dobbs, when the Supreme Court said, we're looking at the 14th Amendment and it no longer protects the right to obtain an abortion. It left these questions to the states. And that's why you and I just had this conversation about what is going to be allowed under the Florida state constitution. When it comes to other states, the questions are largely about what does their state constitution allow. Now, there is an interesting case coming up before the Supreme Court that will be argued this week that deals with a federal law saying that you have to provide people with emergency services when they arrive in an emergency room. I'm being a little general here. And the question is whether or not that conflicts with an Idaho law that is very restricted with respect to the ability to obtain an abortion. And so those are the places where we're seeing state laws interact with federal laws. But mostly, to your question about what does this mean for other states, it means those states will be looking at their constitutions.
Very quickly, Jessica, I'm thinking of the last couple of elections. Trump won in Florida. Do you see this issue actually, being one where, despite how many people come to vote for the president based on abortion rights, at least when it comes to abortion itself and protecting abortion rights in Florida, do you see that as being a victory? How is the state, from what you know, divided right now on abortion?
So I think if we look at the midterm elections, we can see that the Dobbs decision and the ability to protect reproductive choice has been something that has motivated voters to go to the polls. I am not the person who can say I know exactly how this is going to play out in the presidential election, but I know that what we've seen is, if we want to make kind of a blanket statement, that Dobbs has motivated people, not just women and not just Democrats, but motivated many of them to go to the polls. And I think that's why, frankly, we did see some of the results that we saw when it came to the midterm elections. We can also look to some really high-profile state Supreme Court elections, like the one in Wisconsin, where abortion was one of the big issues. And we see that, again, that is something that motivates people to the polls. And at this point, I think motivating people to the polls to say that we do need to have some state protections.
Jessica Levinson, thank you so much. So great to have you.
Thank you.